Hello friends, welcome to Salesforce CMAtics video session 128. So basically in today's video, we will actually do a complete revision of the data layer in Salesforce CMAtics. So, we have learned a lot about the data layer, starting from the data sync, how we, connect the objects, how we actually bring the objects, pass on the objects to any Salesforce object in the local Salesforce, and then, how we pass on the records to some other external, how we pull in the data from our external Salesforce database. So, and at the end of the day, how we make use of the transformation layer, that is, the data layer, the data flow and recipe. So in this video, we will do a complete revision of the data layer part. So as you all know, like, of course, at first we have to select the app launcher, we have to select the analytics studio. We go to the data manager, and this is the new view of the data manager, the job monitor, the data sync which I have. I usually refer the old the old screen where you have this monitor. Okay, so at first, of course, as we already discussed, we have to ensure that we always connect to data. Okay, so whenever there's a new object you have to connect, you can always take this SFDC local, which is, it pulls that object directly from your local Salesforce org. The local Salesforce org means the Salesforce org which contains your Salesforce CMAtics. Okay, and if you want to bring data from other external Salesforce org, you always have to go to add connection, and then ensure that you go to Salesforce external client and do the connection. There are other connection as well, where if you provide the requisite credentials, you can actually bring in the data from there. Okay, of course, in our sessions, we have walked through how we can pull data from Salesforce external developer. Okay. Now, once the connect happens, the next part comes is the sync part basically. So we run the sync, right? For example, you have this run data sync, and basically when we run data sync, usually we get this two option of incremental sync and full sync. The full sync is nothing but it ensures that the refreshes happens completely from the beginning. Okay, so even eventually if you pull in one object, and if there are fields which are pulled in, at first you always have to go for full sync, where whatever data is available, it kind of completely extracts from the beginning. But however, once the full sync happen, and after that, if you are running any sync, you can ensure that you can run the incremental sync, where it will not refresh the database right from the scratch. Okay, so that is one part which can be done with this full sync and incremental sync. And of course, you have that option of scheduling as well. Once you schedule it, uh, you can ensure that you can do either incremental sync or full sync. So in case of scheduling, you have to ensure that you ensure the mode of connection is proper. So when you go to this edit connection mode, for example, for this object we have the incremental sync. Okay, so even if I schedule it, the incremental sync will happen. You can also go for this other option of full sync and periodic sync. Periodic full sync is nothing but everyday incremental sync, but once a day, usually on Friday, it overrides all the records. Okay, so these are the difference. Okay, which we have walked through in one of the sessions as well, which is fine. Now once that is done, what we do is basically this is the monitor screen where we monitor the data. It helps us to monitor, like monitor screen is nothing but tracks the progress of sync, data flow, recipe, and other data jobs that you done. Okay, that is clearly mentioned over here. Now after that, what comes into picture is like whenever you are, once the connection is done and once some fields are established, the thing is that you have to ensure whichever fields you want to bring in, that fields are being selected over there. Okay, so if you don't select the fields, then on the data flow, you cannot actually bring that field. On the recipe, you can still bring that field. The sync will automatically run in that case. Okay, so that's the one part which you have to ensure it's done. And even if you don't go for this sync, and once you have the settings, so for example, we have this analytics settings, right? So if you enable this box, like allows recipe to use direct data, then what happens, even if you don't sync any object or any related field, then you can directly pull in that object on the recipe. And we also understood the difference in the icons, right? So this is one part. And then the transformation which you have to do, we do it completely on the data flow and recipe side. I won't walk you through the data flow and recipe side, okay, because we already walked through in details as well. So we already walked through on data flow, like how all these nodes are being used. Okay, starting from dataset builder, SFDC digest, okay, edge mart. So all the nodes which are there, okay, mainly from the analytics perspective, what are the nodes and what are their usefulness? That is something which we already learned, and similar part is on the recipe side as well. So basically, on the recipe side, we have understood all the different kind of nodes and some additional nodes which are there, okay, on the data flow. And then we also understood what is the difference between data flow and recipe, and how recipe holds an advantage on certain things compared to data flow. Okay, so that part we already walked through. And once that is done, what the next thing you have to ensure is that whenever you are building the data flow, you always ensure that, let me refresh this. you always ensure that you put proper name. So that naming convention has always needs to be proper all the time. So there has been occasion when developers don't put a proper name, and what happens is when you leave a project and when some other developer comes in, it becomes a bit difficult for that person to analyze this whole node. Okay, so always ensure that whenever you are bringing any kind of node, the first option you get is the node name all the time. Okay, so you bring any nodes, that first option will be always ensure that you give the name properly. Okay, so that like someone comes to this particular data flow, they understand, okay, I pulled in the account, I filtered something on the account. Okay, for explanation, I just written this filter with SQL, but ideally you should write filter industry. That's it. If you write filter industry, that's also fine. Okay. So always ensure you give some proper naming convention, especially on the fast register node as well. The naming convention has to be very proper and it has to be crisp, and always ensure you follow the best practice. For example, in alias, you write the underscore, fine. And similar thing is on the recipe side as well. So when you go to the recipe, always ensure the proper naming convention. For example, I've written here filter on Steve name. This is the opportunity data set. Okay, so that is very important. Fine, that is something you have to take into consideration. And also we walk through like on the recipe side, how when we are actually uh, pushing the data to an external log. For example, I think it was done somewhere on free session 5, I guess. Let me check. Not free session 5, I think it has to be free session 2. Okay, let me check the free session 2. Similarly here also, if it's an external account, you have to ensure that you write the proper naming convention. I guess it has to be 3 then, because I'm not able to see it anywhere else. Just let me write over here. Yeah. So example, as you can see over here, whenever you're putting that output connection, okay, always ensure, yeah, basically it's been a long time, so that's why that's coming, but always ensure that you put the proper operation into consideration, whether you're inserting it, whether you're updating it. Okay, and as you might be knowing, like when you are inserting something, you have to yeah, in case of insert, so in case of insert, you always have to ensure that yeah, like the ID is not required. Okay, when you're inserting something, which is fine. Yeah, this message is coming up because the password failed. Okay, let me remove a few of them. Fine. So whenever you're inserting something, you don't have to put the ID, but when it comes to update, right? So in case of updating, you have to ensure that you give the ID so that it can update properly. Okay, which is fine. You can schedule that as well. Okay, that's completely fine. Now that's the whole thing about this data front recipe. Of course, we had a detailed section and you can watch the revisions as well. Okay. Other than that, of course, after the once that is done, we actually come to the dataset side, which is completely fine. Now there's a new way to look into this. So basically, I always refer to this old view, but we have this new view as well. You can utilize this new view. So for example, whatever you see on the monitor screen, okay, that part you can actually see under job monitors in the new view. So you have the job ID, you have the origin status type, and basically what happens over here, you can actually check if a particular sync or a particular data flow recipe ran successfully or not. So of course you have this status symbol. So under the old view, we always used to check by the status. Now here actually you have the complete history. For example, what are the sync which ran successfully? What are the sync which failed, right? So that failed part, you can always check it over here. Okay, you can check the reasons as well, which is completely fine. And what is that type, whether it's data flow recipe or something related to sync. For example, here you see if a sync is running, the type is data sync. If a data flow runs successfully, the type is data flow. If a recipe runs successfully, the type is recipe. So that part you get, okay, and something which is queued, you get to see if it is really in queued. If it is in running stage, you will see it over here. Okay, like sometimes you run a lot of data flow recipe, sometimes it gets to something running. So basically, this whole new view gives you a complete picture. So in old view, it's like you have to analyze by yourself. Like if you ran too many data flows and recipe, it will be marked in the status queue, which is fine. Okay, but in the new view, you have this particular selection where you can actually check in all, you can check everything just like we have in the old view, which is fine. But to get much more details, like which are the things which ran successfully, which are the things which ran fail, and what was the reason at that particular point of time, all those history is being tracked over here in the new view of this particular, uh, I would say, the sync. Okay, how, what you call that? So manage, not manage data flow. Like from here, yeah, the data manager. So basically, this is an old view of the data manager, and this is the new view of the data manager. Then on the data assets, actually, you can see all the data set name, which is also great. You can see it anytime on the analytics studio. That is something which I prefer. But if you want to see it basically over here, you can also check it from the data assets. Something on the old view of, so on the old view of data monitor, you get to see it on the data, under the option data, and in the new view, you get to see on data sets. Okay, so on the data set, you get to see the list of all the data sets which has been created when you ran the data flow recipe. Okay, and one more thing is, on the recipe, ensure that you don't use more than 30 joins. Okay, so whenever you are using recipe, like in one of the session, we actually did related to something related to join. Always ensure that the joins which you use, that should not be more than 30. Okay, so that is something you have to keep in mind. And other than that, we already walked through, like, of course, you can make use the compute expression, but whenever, let's say, you are, ensure that you don't use much of compute relative until unless it's very much needed. Okay, you can do most of the calculation on compute expression node, which is completely fine. And yeah, that's the thing about this one. And coming to this new view of the data manager, here you can also check the list of recipes, something which you had to go on the old view in data flows and recipe. And here you can check the usage. So basically here you get the complete information, the usage overview. Okay, so basically the rows in all data sets, like total number of data sets which you have created, what is the total number of rows, that is something you get to see it over here. Okay, so which is the maximum one of them, that is 2.5 lakh. We have one of the data set where the data are 2.5 lakhs. Okay, then output to Salesforce, output to Snowflake. If there is some data which is getting transferred to Salesforce or to some other Snowflake and Amazon 3D, that you get to see it over here. Data flow and recipe run. So basically, if you see, like, data flows and recipe takes less than 2 minutes, along with data sync and CSV, don't count towards this 24-hour run limit. Okay, so sometimes like if it takes much more time, then basically you get that information over here. Then comes the external data uploads. Okay, anything, the external data which got uploaded, and any output to CSV which you have. Okay, what is that part? So here basically, and the connected objects, like currently the connected objects which we have, that is 20. The maximum connected objects can be 100. Okay, so some of the limitations is, you have to keep in mind. Okay, there are certain limitations which are there on the data flow, on the recipe. Okay, so those limitations you have to keep in mind, and after that, you have to ensure you use the Salesforce CRT in a proper way, so that things can be taken forward. So that's the whole thing about this new view of this data manager. Similarly, on the connections, you can run the connect from here, something which I used to do it over there. You get all those options. Okay, as well as, so data templates is something we can avoid right now. That's completely fine. So that's the whole thing about this new view of the data manager. Okay, and after that, we get the data set. So that's completely fine. And yeah, these are some of the things which you have to keep in mind. So starting from how we pull in the object, so which we do it something like, of course, I have used the old view mainly all the time. Okay, but you can actually use it over here as well. You can have this connection. Okay, you can establish the new connection, and after that, this is how the view looks like. It's something similar to that, but it's just that it's a bit different. Okay, so you get to see all these connection types, and after that, you can actually ensure that you run that particular sync. So once you run, you can go to job monitor and check it. Okay, so you have to always click on this refresh button, and finally, once that's done, you can actually be at the recipe. Now in the new view, if you see, they don't have this option of data flow. The reason being, as I told you, a time will come when data flow won't be used much. We will completely rely on recipes. So in this new view of data manager, you don't get to see the option of data flow. You have to go to this manage data flow. Okay, and after that, of course, you have to create the requisite data flow recipe to ensure the transformation is done. Give the proper naming convention. Okay, and here you can check the other parts as well wherever it's required. Fine, and finally, you can actually see the data set. So this is the complete overview of the data layer of Salesforce CRM. And yeah, that's it about this video. We will very soon meet in the next one. Thank you.